Hey everyone, I hope you're okay. It's Paula here, children's dietitian, pediatric dietitian. Um, I just checking in a bit late, sorry about that. So I hope you're okay today. I'm taking all your questions about weaning, baby nutrition, anything like that. So let me know if you've got any questions. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself while we wait for more people to join us. Welcome if you have joined. My name is Paula. So I'm a children's dietitian. I've been a dietitian for 20 years now. I've been working in the NHS for 18 years, and the last 5 years or so I've had my own private practice. My business is called Tiny Tots Nutrition, and you can find me here on Facebook and also on Instagram at Tiny Tots Nutrition. I'm mostly on Instagram a lot because I find that most of the mums that I'm working with are sort of hanging out on Instagram. So that is where I tend to have most of the lives that I do and post most of my content, although it is cross-posted onto Facebook as well. So I've joined up with your baby club to answer your questions about weaning, baby nutrition, or anything like that. Any questions that you have, toddler nutrition, anything like that is absolutely fine. So I'm just checking here to see if we have any questions. I can see we've got some people joining. So hi to everyone. My name is Paula. Thank you for joining, and please send any questions you've got about your baby's weaning journey, nutrition, toddler nutrition, any questions like that that you might have. Okay, let's just have a look down here. We've got any questions coming in. Okay, so one of the most common questions I usually get asked by a lot of people to do with weaning is, when is the right time to wean my baby? How old should they be? What age should they be when I start weaning? So it's not a simple answer. So the guidelines are around 6 months, but there's quite a lot of flexibility in that. So your baby doesn't have to be exactly 6 months when you start weaning. Some babies are ready a little bit before that, some just slightly after, but I wouldn't delay it too much beyond 6 months of age. So the things to look for, it's more the developmental signs of readiness to look for when your baby's ready for weaning, not their particular actual calendar age. So there are 4 signs to look out for when your baby's ready to start weaning. So the first is that they can sit up straight, so that they can sit up with minimal support. Okay, so they don't have to sit up on the floor completely unaided, but they shouldn't be sort of slumped over. They should be able to sit up in a high chair with a little bit of support. The second thing is that they're able to hold up their head and neck steady. That's really important for swallowing food. So it's really important that they're able to sit up, and that their head and neck they're able to hold that up steady. And the third sign is that they're able to look at food, pick it up, and bring it to their mouth. So you'll be able to notice when they're playing with different toys, particularly those sort of teething toys, or like those sort of silicone toys that they put in their mouth. If they can pick that up, bring it to their mouth, and sort of put that in their mouth, then they have the coordination needed to start solids. Okay, and the fourth and final sign is the loss of something called the tongue thrust reflex. So when babies are born, their tongue movement is just forwards and backwards, and that's because when they are breastfeeding or feeding from a bottle, that's the only tongue movement they actually need. But when they start eating solids, they need to be able to move the food back in their mouth and move it around to be able to deal with that food. So those are the 4 signs to look out for when your baby's ready to start weaning. Okay, so we've got some questions that are starting to come in here. So the first question I've got, which came through this Facebook group, is how much should a 9-month-old be eating? Okay, so there are no official portion size guides for babies under the age of 1, and that's because there's such a huge variation in the amount of foods that different babies eat. Okay, so we have more guides for babies over the age of 1 in terms of portion sizes. But just to give you an idea, a 9-month-old, so a 9-month-old would be fairly established on weaning. They would have been weaning for at least 3 months. So I would expect them to be having solids 3 times a day. So offered some food 3 times a day. And the amount that they actually eat will vary from baby to baby and vary from day to day, depending on how that baby is. So that if they're going through a growth spurt, or if they're teething, they'll eat less, or if they're not well, they'll eat less. So depends on lots of factors, and the appetite can vary a lot. But I would expect a 9-month-old to be on solids 3 times a day, and to be having probably a couple of tablespoons at each of those meals, or picking up 3 or 4 pieces of food. And they would still need their breastfeeds or formula feeds at this age. So at 9 months, they would probably still be feeding at least 3 or 4 times a day. So I would expect them to be having milk feeds around 3 or 4 times a day, as well as solids 3 times a day. And the amount that they actually eat will vary, but it will probably be in the range of a few tablespoons at a time. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so we have another one here for about a 1-year-old. So my 1-year-old used to eat well and now refuses everything. He had a very bad cold a few weeks ago, and I'm wondering if it's linked. Please help. Okay, sure. I'm sorry your little one's been unwell. It's very common for children, once they get over the age of 1, to actually eat less than when they were a baby, and that might sound strange, but in the first year of life, babies are growing really rapidly, extremely rapid growth, and they triple their birth weight. They grow enormously in length as well, and so there's a lot going on in the first year of life, and that actually drives their hunger a lot. When they get over the age of 1, of course, they're still growing, but their growth does actually slow down. So then naturally they do have less of an appetite, less of a sort of drive to eat. So that will affect the appetite. And sometimes children over the age of 1 might even be eating less than a baby a couple of months younger. And also, if they have had a cold, so any kind of illness will definitely decrease your appetite. If you think of yourself as an adult, if you're not feeling well, you definitely don't eat as much as when you are when you're well. But usually, when a baby has come through a period of illness or being unwell, where they're eating much less, they usually go through a sort of a bit of a catch-up phase over the next couple of weeks after that, where they eat slightly more. So another thing to think about when just over a 1-year-old is that they often, about 50% of babies go through a kind of fussy phase. So this is what we call a neophobic phase, which means fear of food, fear of anything new, and that is thought to be an evolutionary thing, where in the past, many thousands of years ago, we didn't want children to eat sort of poisonous things and stuff like that. But now in modern times, obviously this we haven't really got poisonous things lying around, but they still have that kind of innate thing that happens, and that's why babies often become fussy over the age of 1. So what I would say is, don't be too worried. Babies and children's appetites vary a lot. So if they have a cold, their appetite will often go down, and then afterwards there's often a period of the appetite going up quite a lot when they're sort of going through a catch-up phase. So make mealtimes relaxed, calm, happy times. Just offer them a wide range of foods, and they will come back to the things that they used to eat before. The main thing is just to keep things relaxed and still offer them a variety of things. Okay, I hope that really helps. So another question come through here. How long should I give first tastes before I can mix flavors and make recipes? Okay, great question. So the first couple of weeks of weaning is definitely about exploring different tastes and textures. It's not about the volume of food that your baby eats. So I usually advise starting with vegetables, and starting particularly the sort of green bitter vegetables and white neutral tasting vegetables, starting with those, because we know that babies really like sweet things and they won't need much help or encouragement to eat sweet things. Not that there's anything wrong with fruit that is sweet tasting, but it's just that they are very used to those tastes, sweet tastes, because breast milk and formula does taste quite sweet. And so we want to get babies used to vegetables and other savory, bitter tasting things. And so I usually advise the first 2 weeks or so to do just vegetables only. So how long to give first tastes? I would say 1 to 2 weeks, and then you can start mixing up the vegetables, adding in some different vegetables, adding in some fruit if you like, and making different recipes and combining things. So you don't have to keep them on those first tastes for very long. It's usually around 2 weeks or so, I would say. Okay. Okay, another question I've got coming through here about breastfeeding. Can I breastfeed and bottle feed at the same time, or will it confuse baby? Okay, you can definitely breastfeed and bottle feed at the same time, combination feed, sometimes people call it. It's absolutely fine. It is a different sort of sucking, feeding mechanism in terms of feeding at the breast and feeding at a bottle, a teat. I'm not a lactation consultant, so I'm not a huge breastfeeding is not my sort of absolute specialty. So I would advise you to speak more to a lactation consultant if you are worried, but it is definitely possible to breastfeed and bottle feed at the same time. But if you look up a lactation consultant called Stacey Zimmels, her Instagram is called Feed, Eat, Speak. She's got a lot of tips on there about breastfeeding and bottle feeding, and how you can change between the two, and lots of tips and things on there. So have a look at that, check that out. Okay, this is great. So we've got a lot more questions here. So another question is about finger foods. This is great. I get lots of questions about finger foods. I'm so scared to give finger foods to my 7-month-old in case she chokes, but no, I need to. Any tips? Okay, great question. So many people ask me this, so I'm really glad that you asked this. I think it's great that you want to, and you should give finger foods. So the first thing I would say about choking is that a baby can choke on purees, they can choke on finger foods, they can choke on either of those things. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean just because you're giving finger foods that it's more risky in terms of choking. But the first thing I would say is for all parents is go on a first aid course. Okay, so choking doesn't happen very often, but if it does happen, you want to be prepared. So go on a first aid course where they teach you all about choking and what to do if it happens, and exactly how to deal with that. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say that there's two very different things here. Choking and gagging, okay, are two very, very different things. So when babies eat, and when they're starting to learn to eat, eating and feeding is a skill, and so they need to learn how to deal with the food and the textures in their mouth. And so when babies start weaning, they will gag on certain foods sometimes. So they might gag on lumps, they might gag on finger foods, but that is not choking. Okay, it's very, very different. So when a baby gags on something, they will cough, they will turn red, their eyes might water a little bit, and then they will bring up the lump. And the gag reflex, which is on the baby's tongue, is to protect their airway. So it's actually a really good thing. It's a protective mechanism, gagging, so that the food doesn't go down into the airway. So if your baby is coughing, going a bit red, and maybe their eyes watering, that is gagging, it's not choking. If a baby or child or adult, anyone is actually choking, their airway is completely blocked off, so there will be no sound coming out. So it's completely silent, and babies might start going blue around the lips and the mouth. And that is choking, and that's when you do need to intervene. Okay, so just wanted to say that it's two very different things. I have a post on my Instagram page about gagging and choking if you want to go and check it out. So some tips about finger foods. So in terms of the actual food to make it safe for your baby and appropriate for a 7-month-old. So we advise soft finger foods to be started being introduced from around 6 months. So 6.5 months, 7 months is perfect time to start introducing finger foods. So the first thing I would say is to think about is the size of the food that you're giving and the texture of it. Okay, so the size of the food, it should be quite big. So it should be at least the size of your finger, so like a chip shape, and that's because babies at this age only have a palmar grasp, and so they pick up things with their fist. And so when you give them something, you want them to be able to pick it up and then have some of the food sticking out their fist. So you want that piece of food to be quite big. They only develop their pincer grasp at about 9-10 months of age, and that's when they can pick up smaller pieces of food like peas, beans, things like that. So you want the size of the food to be quite big, and then secondly, you want the texture of the food to be very, very soft. So the test is for you, if you can squish the food between your thumb and your forefinger, that means that it's soft enough for your baby to cope with it on their gums. So they can mash it with their gums, and they can use their tongue to help mash that food. Okay, so if it's soft and it's big enough, then that food is safe for your baby. So some really good foods to start with for finger foods are things like broccoli, because that's great. They can hold on to the stalk, and the top of the broccoli is very soft. So cook it just a little bit longer than you would maybe for yourself. And then something like roasted sweet potato is great. It's really, really soft. Roasted parsnips, roasted carrots, roasted things work really, really well, and roast them for quite long so that they're very, very soft. So those are the types of things that I would help. I would hope that helps you. Okay, so just looking at some of the other questions. 3-month-old spitting so much milk almost after every feed. What should I do? Okay, so I don't know what's going on with this baby, and I would need to know more about their medical history and stuff, but I would say speak to your GP if they are just, or health visitor, if they're just positing, it might be okay, but if there's a lot of, if they're vomiting after every feed, then there might be something else going on there, so speak to your doctor about that. Okay, I've just started weaning, 6 months, but my son won't open his mouth for spoon feeding. What can I do? Okay, great question. So first of all, that's great that you've just started with weaning. Second of all, just to say that 6 months, you've only just started out, so try not to pressurize too much and keep it sort of fun. And try and let your baby be involved in the feeding process. So if they don't want to open their mouth for a spoon, you can load up a spoon. So put some food onto a spoon and then hand it to your baby and sort of guide it to their mouth. You can also give them some soft finger foods and see if they're more interested in that. You can also give them a puree that's a bit thicker so that they can put their hands in it, and it'll be very messy, but letting them pick up the food and sort of bring it to their mouth or lick it off their fingers, that type of thing. So try and get them a bit more involved in the experience. And also, that's what I would say. So try and get them a little bit more involved, either with finger foods or with puree, letting them actually put their hands in and touch it themselves. There's also something called a dip spoon by a brand called Cogni Kids, and that can help with encouraging self-feeding. So it's basically a spoon with sort of silicone bumps on it, and it's flat. It doesn't have a scoop, and so if babies just dip it into a puree, some of the food gets stuck to around the edge of that spoon, and then they can just bring it up to their mouth and lick or suck that off. So that can really encourage them with weaning and getting them interested. Okay, this is brilliant. Just looking at more of your questions. Okay, so my baby was 6 weeks premature. Should I start weaning according to her due date or her actual birth date? Okay, that's a really good question. So anything before 37 weeks just gestation, so 36 weeks or earlier, is considered premature. So this is the one 6 weeks premature. Okay, so I would say look for those signs of developmental readiness, not necessarily their actual age. So trying to look for those signs of your baby sitting up, holding the neck up, able to pick things up, move them to their mouth, and the loss of that tongue thrust reflex, so not sticking their tongue out or when you put your finger on their lip. So looking for those signs of developmental readiness will help you decide whether they're ready for solids or not. The earlier a baby, the more premature they are, the more likely it is that they might have other issues going on. So they might have developmental issues, or they might have muscle tone issues. So speak to your medical team as well about that. Okay, so another question. My little girl eats anything that I blend, but when it's cut up, she won't eat it. What can I do? Okay, yeah, so this is really common. Babies getting sort of stuck on or staying on the smooth purees for quite a long time. So what I always encourage people is when babies start weaning, remember I said about the first 2 weeks or so, giving just vegetables and tastes of vegetables. And so depends on each family will have their own preference. Some people might go for sort of finger food straight away, baby-led weaning, or some might start with purees and then building up the texture from there. But I would encourage you to thicken up the puree. So if your baby will eat anything, your little girl will eat anything that you blend. So I would start off by blending things just slightly less. So if you're using a hand blender, just blending it for a slightly shorter time so that it's not quite as smooth. And also thickening up the puree, so slightly less liquid adding to the puree so that she becomes used to thicker textures in her mouth. And another thing you can do is adding to purees is adding something like couscous or something that has a bit of graininess, adds a little bit of graininess to the puree so that it's not completely smooth and has a little bit of texture to it. So that can help move them along with textures. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, my little girl is 10 months old, constantly gags on food with textures. How do we overcome this? Okay, so yeah, similar question. So I would say gradually work on the textures, so thickening them up at first, because a smooth puree with sort of lots of lumps in it, a smooth, quite thin puree with lots of lumps in it is quite a difficult texture to deal with because it's a mixture of lots of different textures, something runny and then lumps in it. So thickening up the puree first before adding the lumps can help. What can also help with if babies are gagging a lot is, remember I said the gag reflex with babies is quite far forward. So with adults it's right at the back of our throat. With children babies it's about halfway on their tongue, and so if a lump gets on there they can gag quite easily. And what can really help is finger foods can help, and also toys, so teething toys and silicone teethers, all sorts of things like that, helping them, letting them play with those things and bite on them and chew them, so that they get used to the sensation of something in their mouth. That can help with their food, so that when they are given things that have got more texture and like finger and also finger foods that can help if they've had these teethers, that can help with getting them used to different things in their mouth, the sensation of something else in their mouth. Okay. So there's a question about a tongue tie. My 2-year-old has a pretty bad tongue tie. We're still trying to get an appointment to get sorted, as it's been really difficult with COVID. Any advice on how to make it easier for our little one to deal with eating and drinking problems until we manage to get it sorted? Okay, that's a really difficult one. I'm not really an expert on tongue ties. I would really recommend speaking to a speech and language therapist, because they really know and are experts in the mouth, the tongue, muscles around the mouth, swallowing, and all the things in the oral cavity. So I'd really recommend speaking to a speech and language therapist for that one. There's another question here about reflux. My daughter's 5 months old and started weaning due to reflux. What's the best for her to have? Fruit puree seems to aggravate her. Okay, so some pediatricians do advise weaning babies with reflux a bit earlier, and in my experience that doesn't necessarily help reflux. Some babies, it makes things worse for them. Some, it seems to improve the situation, but I'm not sure if that's just coincidence or not. So it's very variable in terms of whether introducing solid will actually help with reflux or not. A lot of the time it doesn't. So I would advise giving vegetables, actually, same as I would with any other baby, starting with neutral and better tasting vegetables at first, and then combining those, and then adding in some grains like oats and things like that to move things along. And then once they get to 6 months, they need iron-rich foods, so adding in iron-rich foods as well. So I would go to giving them some vegetables initially at that stage. Okay. So I've got a question here about a baby is very nearly 6 months. She's on breastfeeds and bottle feeds. We started to give 1 spoon of porridge in the afternoon. How much does she need to be fed and how often? So, okay, so in the beginning, as I said before, it's really not about volume in the beginning. So it's just about tastes, textures. If you think about it, babies, all they have known so far has been liquid milk feeds. So whether that's breastfeeds or formula feeds, but that's all they know, is how to drink liquids. So what we're teaching them now is how to deal with something that is a different texture and a different taste. So in the beginning, I would recommend just once a day, initially when you first start weaning, for the first 2 weeks or so, and then increasing it to twice a day, and then up to 3 times a day by the time they're 7 to 8 months of age. It also depends, this baby's almost 6 months, but it depends when they started weaning. So if babies started weaning earlier because they were advised for allergy prevention or something like that, then you might go a little bit slower and you might keep them on once a day for a bit longer. So it just depends on the baby, but start off with once a day, and don't worry too much about how much they're taking initially. Their milk feeds are still giving them most of their nutrition, and it's a very gradual decrease over the next couple of months, in terms of their milk feeds going down and their food increasing. Okay. Okay, so I think I just have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So my son is 5 months and I have started some porridge. I want to try baby-led weaning and puree. What's the best foods to start with? So I usually recommend starting with vegetables. It's not that there's anything wrong with starting with porridge. It's absolutely fine. It's absolutely safe to give to babies. It's just that it doesn't give them much of a different taste experience, in terms of something different from milk. So from breastfeeds or formula feeds, it tastes quite similar. So I would recommend giving some vegetables, getting them used to all sorts of different vegetables, different tastes. Vegetables, particularly the green vegetables, quite bitter, so it'll take them a little bit longer to get used to those sort of flavors, but it can help them with liking vegetables later on, throughout their first year and later on in life. So I would recommend starting with vegetables, particularly green and white vegetables. Okay, so there's a question there about sleep. And I'll just take one more question here. So how much milk should my daughter have at 11 months? Okay, so I presume this baby's formula fed, because obviously if a child's breastfeeding, we don't know necessarily how much milk they're having. You would just feed them responsively on demand. But at 11 months, if a baby is formula fed, I would expect they would be having around 400 mils of milk or so. So around 3 times a day. And then at a year, you would decrease that to probably twice a day. And at a year of age, you can change them over to cow's milk if you wanted to, as long as they didn't have any allergy or anything like that. And from the age of 1 to 3, their calcium requirements are less than in the first year of life. And so they don't actually need that much milk anymore. So from the age of 1, 300 mils a day is actually enough milk to give them their calcium requirements. And if they're eating other dairy foods, other calcium containing foods, they could actually have less. Okay, so I'm going to head over to Instagram now, and I'm going to be answering some questions live on the Your Baby Club Instagram feed. So if you didn't get your question answered here, you can hop over to Instagram if you'd like, and you could always come next week and ask your question then. I'd be happy to answer it. So thanks everyone for joining me, and I hope it was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye.